All right, everybody. I am here with Dustin McNeill, who is a very accomplished writer who has many books on different horror films and kind of breaking them down of, piece by piece of the history of them. But as I say on every single interview constantly, he can do a lot better job of telling us about himself than I can. So, Dustin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, John. I'm Dustin McNeill, and I'm the owner, primary author of Harker Press, which is my publishing imprint. And so far, I've published and authored 6 books on horror movie subjects, ranging from Halloween to Freddy versus Jason to Phantasm. And I've had a modest amount of success with that, a moderate amount of success, I should say. And I just hope to keep doing it as long as I can get away with it. I love horror movies, and it's a lot of fun writing about them.
Yeah, and one of obviously the books that caught my attention and got you on my radar was Slash of the Titans, because I always was so intrigued by the fact that a Freddy versus Jason movie was teased in 1993, and then it took an entire decade for that movie to be made. Why did that movie take 10 years to be made here?
It was so hard for New Line to find the right tonal balance between Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, just because they're the two biggest modern horror icons doesn't automatically mean they're easily compatible, because they're not. You've got Friday the 13th, which is more grounded ultimately in reality, and you've got the more fantastical world of Nightmare on Elm Street. And to find the right approach was really difficult. And they also didn't feel, New Line Cinema in the 1990s was swinging a lot of home runs, so they weren't feeling financially pressured to pull the trigger on Freddy versus Jason. It was very easy for them to keep kicking that ahead to next year, saying, we'll tackle that in a couple of years. We don't have to do that right now. And you may not like the Freddy versus Jason that we got in 2003. I liked it, but a lot of people didn't. But if you didn't like it, I would encourage people to check out the book to see what you could have gotten, because some people read Slash of the Titans and they go, these would have been so much better. These alternate storylines would have been so much better than what we got. And then some people read it and go, thank God we didn't get that. So, so many different impressions people can have to it.
Yeah, and what were just maybe one example of one of the crazy ideas and one of the ideas that maybe would have actually been better than what we got?
I'm such a pushover. I actually like pretty much the book, and I have to pull it up here. This is the book, Slash of the Titans. I haven't read it in years, and so what is it? 17 screenwriters, right? And
17 screenwriters, yeah.
Yeah, and together they had 10 different drafts, I think, and some of them really went wild with it. And so some of them, for example, and I forget the specifics because keeping this all up here years later is really hard. When you're writing about the same story, 10 different versions of it, you start to go cross-eyed after a while, trying to remember what was part of what. But one of the screenwriters tried to be very faithful, I think Peter Briggs' screenplay was extremely faithful to the existing continuity. And so you had characters from Jason Goes to Hell returning, and you had characters from Elm Street returning, and they wanted to make it a direct sequel to both franchises. Other screenwriters said, absolutely not. We're not going to even reference the other movies, and we're going to start fresh with new continuity. Yet another set of screenwriters, and I hate that I can't remember the specifics of this, but another set of screenwriters said, okay, in this one, Friday the 13th, they kind of took the New Nightmare approach where they said, Freddy and Jason are movie characters, and we're going to have them come into the real world. So there's just so many different ways you could do it. One of them, more than one of them, had them going down to hell. One of them had Pinhead coming into it. It's wild how many different versions of this you can do.
And this wasn't the first time that they tried to do a crossover, correct? What was it? Friday the 13th wanted to do that franchise wanted to do a crossover sooner.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. So the first documented example I could find of someone having mentioned the idea of Freddy versus Jason was the screenwriter of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I don't want to say the wrong name, so I'll just say that the fabulous screenwriter of Nightmare 2. He was the first person that I could find documented evidence of in Fangoria as having mentioned the idea of Freddy versus Jason. That was the earliest written record of the idea. But Paramount, not New Line, Paramount actually had the idea of crossing over the franchises with, like you said, Friday 7.
Yes.
Yeah, where with the telekinetic powers, and they went to New Line, and New Line was like, "Yeah, we'd love to do that. We'll take your character and we'll make it." And Paramount said, "No, we'll take your character and we'll make it." And that was very quickly a dead situation because neither studio wanted to relinquish not just control, but the financial benefits, because one was going to be paid a fee to license the character, and then one was going to reap millions at the box office when it was a smash hit. And no one wanted to be the guy that was paid the fee. And of course, that situation took care of itself because eventually New Line Cinema became the New Line House of Horror, and they had Freddy, they had Jason, they had Leatherface. They tried very hard to get Michael Myers, but they couldn't do it. Dimension beat them out.
Gotcha. And how on board was, Robert Englund, at say the beginning or the middle, 5 years later or 10 years later, because I mean, no offense to Kane Hodder whatsoever, but you can put somebody else in the hockey mask, but Robert Englund is Freddy. So how on board was he for this whole process?
I was fortunate enough to interview Robert for Slash of the Titans, and he was very on board with it. I love how open-minded he is to where they could have taken Freddy. He's open to different versions of it. He's open to darker Freddy. He's open to funnier Freddy. He's open to appearing in music videos as he did. I mean, he's open to these different ideas so long as it's done with sincerity and done well. Love that about him. I mean, if he was really rigid, he might not have stayed in the character as long as he did, but he was. And he was on board with Freddy versus Jason long before it was made. At Kane Hodder, it's so, it's one of those just, his fans would say tragedies of the genre, but I think he deserved, as many years and as much as he put into the role, I think he deserved to play Jason in Freddy versus Jason. Having said that, I thought Kim Kersinger did a wonderful job, and I'm a fan of him. And so it's one of those awkward things.
And, there were multiple ending choices for the film, right? I mean, I'd say to anybody, if you really want all the details, buy the book because it's a great book. But was it just some people had Freddy winning, some people had Jason winning, or what were some of those different types of endings?
Yeah, and so that was the thing. How do you end it? It was a constantly evolving idea. They shot several of them. Several of them they only wrote. One of the ideas they really considered was having them, and this is of course, if you have the DVDs or the Blu-rays, this is in the special features, but they even storyboarded having both characters get swallowed up into the bowels of hell from Crystal Lake. And as they realize where they're at, Lake of Fire, Pinhead shows up and says a little quip, and that would be the ending. And they were hoping to kick that to the next Freddy vs. Jason 2, which was never made, regrettably, because I think that could have been a lot of fun. There's so much you can do with it. And they did do Freddy versus Jason versus Ash, which would have been a lot of fun. The comic book. Yeah. They did the comic book.
Yeah, there was a lot of that going around where it was going to be Bruce Campbell gets brought into this world. So it takes 10 years to be made, and as you mentioned, there's no rush, so to speak, for this. But how do you end Jason Goes to Hell with a teaser for this and not try to pay that off a lot quicker, especially since the slasher genre was really kind of at its popular end at that point. So it felt like they had to pay it off then, but how did they not pick a screenplay sooner, or just trust in a director, or get the guys on board? How does that take so long?
Well, Hollywood is so reactionary. It looks at what was most recently done and then moves from that. And so if you look at how Jason Goes to Hell did, if you look at how Freddy's Dead did, if you look at how Halloween 6 did. The slasher genre was not booming in the 90s until Scream. It was kind of languishing a bit. It wasn't a big box office hit, that subgenre. And so I think that made it easy for them to say, well, let's wait. There's no real rush. The closest they came to doing Freddy vs. Jason was in 98 or 99, I want to say, with Rob Boutin. Rob Boutin was the special effects legend behind movies like The Thing. I mean, the guy's, he's done a lot of stuff, but he is just a mastermind. And he was really passionate into his version of Freddy vs. Jason. He was going to co-write it. He was going to direct it. He was going to be his directorial debut, in fact. He was going to redesign Freddy, and he did. He did pre-production work where he redesigned Freddy and redesigned Jason. The effects in that movie were going to be top-notch, if nothing else. But he quit the project under, you might say, mysterious circumstances. He just got fed up with all the Hollywood bullshit, is one theory. But that his version got so far along that they actually had marketing materials drawn up for it. They released, if you remember, in the late 90s, McFarlane Toys released the movie Maniacs action figures. That's where we've got the first real Freddy and Jason action figures. The early advertising material for those says Freddy and Jason from the upcoming movie, Jason versus Freddy. And they had to redesign the packaging at the last minute to remove all reference to Jason versus Freddy because it had been pulled. And they registered, it was that same year in 98 or 99 that they registered FreddyVersusJason.com and JasonVersusFreddy.com because they thought this is so imminent to happening that we need to get marketing ready. They did a teaser trailer for it that they showed at a Vegas theater exhibitor trade show. You can find that on YouTube, the early trailer. Of course, it was all cut together using footage from the previous movies, but that's how close it was to happening in the late 90s, and it fell apart.
And 2003, I'm sure they shot it in 2002, but was it just a matter of and I'm not saying one way or another about the film, but did they just finally say, all right, let's use this script, let's just greenlight this one, let's just make it and move on? Because it seemed almost at that point, these characters are still popular, they're still iconic, but the window had passed where this is going to make a boatload of money. Did they feel that they just owed it and let's make it, let's just use this one?
So this is where I'm a forgetful author because I wrote this book in 2017, but the book has 10 chapters for the 10 unmade screenplays, and every chapter ends with a big section called Why It Wasn't Made. And then the final chapter of the book is on the version we got in 2003, and there's a section there called Why It Was Made. Why did this version get made? And I can't remember all the specifics. I know there was a shakeup at New Line to where the executives that had been lording over the project and kind of allowing it to languish were no longer there at the company. And they might have also needed a hit. I can't remember. I should have reread the whole book before this. But yeah, there were pretty concrete reasons you could look at and add up and see why it was made in 2003. And it was the right time for it. I mean, Freddy vs. Jason was a hit when it came out. It wasn't, the explosive return of the slasher genre, but it hit at a good time for New Line, and it performed pretty well.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating thing if you are a fan of horror movies, but also a fan of how the Hollywood system works. So I would definitely tell anybody, check out the book. It's amazing. And where can people find the book?
So Slash of the Titans, The Road to Freddy vs. Jason. You can get this in paperback on Amazon. It's also available for Kindle. And most recently, there's an audiobook version available on Audible, which is through Amazon. So if you're into audiobooks or you'd like to listen to it, there's a really great version from Encyclopocalypse Publications. And if you've never done Audible before, let me tell you this, they do a free trial where you get tested out for 30 days, cancel it if you don't like it, but you get a free audiobook for doing the trial. So if you want to give it a listen, you don't want to subscribe to Audible, do the free trial, get the book, you're welcome.
Very nice. Very nice.